Kevin helps and people design help companies grow, and kind of we want to draw a line from if you're doing sustainability work, right? You need to do what you're obligated to do, meet the regulations, do those pieces. But this is a unique job that kind of has two roles, right? We see this a lot with sustainability reports, where the role of the report is to tell everybody what you did, and then also tell everyone what you're going to do to set a vision, and to grow the company, right? So I think as we kind of talk through today, it's basically we have 3 statements that we'll put up on the screen after this slide. But as we walk through this, I'm going to let Kevin speak to each one of those statements. We'll ask a few questions, but I think what the prompts for you guys are in the audience, think about the business that you're in and think about what sustainability does for that business, what it can do, right? Why are you in this space? What are you hoping, how does it differentiate your business, right? Who else in your company who's not currently in that space would benefit from the work that you're doing, or benefit in some way from the sustainability space? And then what story are you or your company trying to tell? So those are the 3 prompts. I want you to kind of think through those, and then that hopefully will lead to some further discussion later. So we'll go to the first one. Okay, compliance is the cost of survival, Kevin. What does this mean to you?
Well, when I want to get people inspired, I usually start with compliance. That's usually it's a good place to start. When I think about compliance, you guys are all much more deeply in the sustainability space than I am personally, and you could all teach me a lot. I think it's interesting though, because when I think about compliance, I think about there was an executive who told me once that his vision for the company was profitability. And to me, to say your vision of the company's profitability is kind of like saying, I just want to get enough to eat today without starving. So I think we can think about sustainability in a lot of different ways. And of course, we're looking at this, and certainly what Foresight offers its customers is a lot of support in trying to move the needle in various ways, track data and so forth. But I think, trying to get back to kind of the why, what's the purpose of this? Why are we in this room? Why do you guys have this job? Why are you here, right? On some level, it's an obligation. But I guess I would refer you back to the chart that Brian introduced in the beginning, which is something that we've been kind of collaborating on. This idea that you can view these sustainability requirements, the compliance needs, as an obligation, and certainly many companies do. I mean, many companies see it as kind of like a tax, right? It's kind of like something you have to, and it sort of holds your nose. And yet, the truth is, you can think about it in a much broader kind of a way. Another way to think about this is, there's, that chart kind of suggests kind of a rising water line where the standards continue to sort of evolve. Another way to look at it, another framing would be not just profitability, but also technology. Technology continues to change as well, right? Where it's continuing to provide new opportunities to do work differently, digital transformation and so on, right? So what if there was a technology compliance metric we're trying to meet? It's a little bit silly, right? Because in some ways, people just see kind of the headspace and the opportunities to sort of reinvent their businesses through a different lens. And I think that's very true for sustainability. I mean, we can certainly the true believers and the people in this room who didn't actually pursue this career because they were trying to look at sustainability metrics or compliance per se, because you have a belief system and you have kind of something that it connects with you on a personal level and a societal level, and something that you're trying to represent within your company. And all of that just speaks to kind of opportunity. So there's a different way to sort of think about it as, compliance is just kind of keeping up with everyone else. And if you make compliance the goal, if you're just trying to keep right at that kind of right at the water line of that chart, success means parity.
Yeah, and I think there's a tension here too, because they're both very real problems, right? This isn't to say, don't pay attention to compliance, just keep your head up, and everything will grow inevitably. But I think the type of work that compliance requires and is very different than the type of work that Kevin speaks to really well. And I think holding that tension as practitioners of space is really the challenge. And I think there are deep expertise in both of these spaces. Should we go to the next one?
Sure.
So obligation doesn't wait for permission, neither should opportunity. You want to speak to that one?
Sure. So, I think you can think about your role, depending on, each of you probably have a different kind of role in your organization and what you're representing in terms of why you're here to learn, why you're trying to advance this agenda. But I think you can also think of yourself as kind of an evangelist of a broader set of ideals. Again, if you broaden the perspective from thinking about it as a tax or just kind of staying alive or just keeping up with competitors, you can think about it as a broader reframe of what the company actually does. And I think, again, it's funny how I've realized over the years about, people like to talk about change. A lot of business books like to talk about change. What I've realized, of course, is that within an organization, it's the people at the top of the organization that like to talk about change, and the entry-level people that like to talk about change, and all the people in the middle whose jobs are at stake are the people who resist change, right? And so I think change is hard, right? But I also think, that chart kind of implies the change is happening whether you want it or not, right? It's coming, right? The technology is changing, the climate change is something that is real, right? We know this. So the question is, how do you respond to that? And so I think trying to be an evangelist within your organization, reaching out to other parts of the organization, don't see it as simply just this tax that exists over in the corner. Or for that matter, once one of the things we talk about with our Foresight friends is the sustainability reports that, become kind of, again, is that an obligation or an opportunity? There's kind of the sense of like, we want to track for our customers, for our investors, what have you. There's some kind of report, and the challenge of turning a lot of data into a meaningful communication is maybe no small task, and it seems like something that's kind of complicated to do. But I think that what it shouldn't be is an afterthought. There should be a vision for how the organization views sustainability. And, if you think about it that way, and you think about the metrics as something that you're just using to kind of measure your progress against your broader goals, the report shouldn't be that hard, right? The report is just an indicator of like, well, this is where we are now because we've already identified our North Star. So the way I look at these things, as Danny mentioned earlier, we try to help companies grow, and so much of it often is based on kind of a clear vision of the future and trying to backcast from there, right? So you're not thinking about it as just being pushed from behind in terms of like the compliance, the continued pressure to kind of change the way you function as an organization with sort of at gunpoint, but thinking about something that is kind of drawing you forward, right? Trying to decide for yourself and trying to help your organization move forward with a more coherent vision, and that your sustainability vision may be very much aligned with your broader business vision, right? The opportunity at some point is not just an opportunity on a sustainability front, but some of the things that we think about are differentiation on a brand level. I mean, the way you can sort of stand out among your competitors, among your whole industry. Brian and I have talked about this quite a bit, and Danny too. There's this idea that really within any industry, there's going to be a leader in the sustainability space, and why not your organization, right? And I don't just mean like there's an energy use opportunity and there's kind of a broader sustainability kind of like mindset, but it's also a question of like literally making your company a better choice for its customers in a way that you can talk about in the marketplace that goes beyond the sustainability report.
I think one of the frameworks that we've talked about is the say-do piece, and I think that plays a little bit of a role here. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit,
sure.
And we can kind of dive into that.
Yeah, we have kind of at People Design, we have kind of a philosophy about how there are these macro level changes that are going on, I think, in our society, and some of the things that I teach about actually in my classes when I think about information strategy for my class at Northwestern. And, we're everything that we enjoy today, the technology in this room, the lights and the running water and so on, are this wonderful product of industrialization, right? And industrialization has had this incredible impact on the quality of lives of people in the first world. But we're sort of at the tail end of one arc of industrialization, right? Where there's a new, basically an era that's based on technology and data and knowledge and that sort of thing, which is a reframe of how you even think about these things. And the reason I mention that is, and it's all, and it plays out in lots of ways, right? In terms of like, we have kind of an industrial mindset for the way we think about everything. We think about schools like a factory with like students coming in on one side and coming out the other side with a degree, or a hospital. We think about it that way. We think about it almost like the assembly line is kind of like the metaphor of our time. And I don't know if the assembly line is actually the best metaphor for the way organizations work, because that's actually not how people learn or how they heal. But the say-do idea is the idea that basically in the past, marketing folks, people like me, basically, our organization would do something, and that, they'd get the marketing or salespeople, go say something about it, right? Go sell it, basically. And I think that what's happening is that there's kind of a flip going on where organizations that are becoming more purpose-driven and have kind of a clearer sense of what the future looks like, that is not based on kind of this, just extending this kind of mechanical industrial paradigm, are saying something that enables them to do different things. Well, and I don't mean, like Corinne was saying, it's not getting out ahead of what you're actually delivering, but it is a question of like having an envisioning process and having sustainability play a role in this that is not based on compliance, but based on a vision of the future that's not based on the past.
Yeah, I was going to point at Corinne also, because I thought that conversation was 100%. Exactly, and I think that's the balance, and I think that's what you do a really good job of speaking to is, as sustainability professionals, being able to talk about things, the same thing, nothing's changed before and after you've put out that report, but the story has changed, and what people are expecting of you as a company and what your customers are looking for changes, right? And I think that in a way shapes the opportunity to do more as a company, right? To buy your energy differently and to approach your products differently and to run your business differently.
Absolutely.
I saw this graph this morning, otherwise I would have put it in the presentation. But if you imagine the y-axis of being kind of the health of an organization, or health, honestly, of any living systems, and the x-axis being one on the left side of resiliency, on the right side of efficiency, there is a tension between, and there's a space of health, of vitality, between, kind of at the middle of that, right? And so what I think Kevin's spoken to really well is that we've really driven in on the efficiency side. But what data and a lot of the AI and a lot of the progress that's being made today helps us be more resilient, right? It helps us be prepared. Even our regulations right now are being asked on climate resiliency, right? We're looking at physical risk and transition risk. We're not being asked as to tell our investors how efficient we're going to be tomorrow. We're asked how resilient we are going to be tomorrow, right? And so I think that kind of speaks to the same shift that Kevin was talking to.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think some of these ideas can sound for some people to sound kind of esoteric, right? So like regenerative futures and things. But the truth is, we are entering into, as I was trying to suggest, we're entering into a very different time, right? Where ideas around like understanding like the nature of systems, which is kind of just like natural systems and human systems. I mean, we were talking, somebody mentioned AI earlier. Like literally, this is technology we don't completely understand, right? We have created this Pandora's box kind of moment. And understanding what are the inputs and what are the outputs, what is the desired goal. These are things that I think increasingly are going to be part of what it is to stay alive as a business. And so I think that sustainability has a different meaning in that light.
Want to go to the next slide? Sure. All right, if you don't shape your sustainability story, someone else will write it for you.
But one of my favorite quotes is, "You cannot not communicate." Right? So not saying anything is also communicating, right? This is true. And I think communication is one of these, I use this quote in my class at George Bernard Shaw, who said like one of the biggest misconception of communication is that people think it actually occurred. Communication is really hard, actually. Communication requires understanding who the recipient is. Communication is fundamentally, when I'm sitting up here like yapping at you, it's not really communicating. This is a broadcast, right? Communication is a 50% receiver or sender, 50% receiver kind of operation. So this is partly why people come to like sustainability reports and like, what is this for? My first question is, who is it for? And what are you trying to convey? Like communication is not, the data are not completely unbiased in the sense that they're just numbers until somebody puts it into kind of a framing. Stories are fundamentally how humans understand basically anything in the world. That's how we think about most information is usually through a story. And so, the opportunity here, in a sense, is to think about it not as like a make-believe story, but thinking about it as like, what are you actually trying to convey? Who is on the receiving end? And the truth is, the sustainability story for an investor might be a different story than for your customer, right? I mean, this is like, it sounds like a little bit like you're trying to play some kind of a game, but it's also just the nature of, how we kind of function as humans, right? I mean, it's like the kind of code switching that when you talk to your parents versus your friends, you speak differently, and this is just true, right? We know this to be true. So, the idea here is that, whatever you're doing, even if it's nothing, is sending a message to the marketplace. And so, what obligation do you have from a communication standpoint? Well, at the minimum, you should try to tell the story of what you're doing, and maybe do a better job telling the story of what you're doing, right? I mean, even that alone is like usually the subject matter of the sustainability report assignment. Of course, what I would suggest is try to come up with a better story, a better, develop a strategy. Corinne was talking about this earlier, that actually is more substantive and is more long-term and is not merely actually benchmarking against your competitors or even the marketplace, but thinking about it as a way to drive innovation within your organization.
We recently did, so we do supplier outreach for our clients. So we'll go get requests, data from their supply chain, and we aggregated all of this. And two of the suppliers gave responses that were relatively absurd. Like they were like perfect marks, and then also we don't do anything. And so they were discounted. The story, because the story was not cohesive, it was not possible, and so this is our client's view of their supply chain, right? And so they now have authored a story about their suppliers because those suppliers really didn't engage in the effort, right? And that is a perfect example of how this shows up. And so that client of ours is like, they're trying to make goals and trying to meet those goals, and they're trying to figure out who their partners are in the space, and that was that whole effort. And that's a kind of a very real example of when somebody didn't engage with the story, but the story was still told, right? And they're at the bottom. So, yeah.
I think the opportunity with communication is also, if you speak to any speechwriter who works for like a politician or an executive, from the executive or politician standpoint, there's nothing. I have these perfect ideas. I just need to get them out on paper. And the truth is, the speechwriter, half the time, is helping to create the policy, because the communication is like, it's not completely substantively the policy, but it is like how it's expressed and who it is expressed to has everything to do with whether or not it gets traction. So I guess I'm saying, kind of the communication opportunity, in a sense, within both, within your marketplace, but also just even within your companies, how is sustainability framed in general? And it's, and so thinking about it as something that would be of keen interest to the business folks, the financial folks, the marketing folks, the sales folks, right? That you, as a catalyst for this conversation within your organization, can really play a role that is, ultimately has the same ends or same objectives of trying to meet these very I can only imagine the complexity of what you guys deal with from a compliance standpoint. But at the end of the day, they're just numbers, right? They're just trying to measure progress. Let's talk about what direction the progress is going in.
Yeah, maybe we could untie. Yeah, maybe a good place to kind of land. We've talked a little bit, and kind of going back to that first statement around the role that vision plays in all of this, right? And so we're talking about telling the story. We're talking about moving from compliance into opportunity, and I think what we haven't talked about, and Kevin mentioned it briefly there, is none of that's really possible unless you have a kind of a clear vision to put this in context, right? And I think some of the work that you do maybe can speak to.
Yeah. So I think that, again, you can view these, if you view it as a tax, if it seems like this burden, this obligation, it's costing the company money to change, right, to meet these requirements and to keep up with, at the state level and the federal level, just get a new regime in Washington and everything changes, and it's like it's chaotic. I mean, I can only imagine, but it's also true that the business leaders in your organization are desperate for new ideas as to how to differentiate their company in the marketplace. Like, independent of sustainability or independent of any of this stuff, right? So technology is one way to do that. Sustainability is one way to do that, right? I mean, there's, obviously product innovation, other kinds of, supply chain innovation, but sustainability touches so many parts of the organization. It is a lens through which you can drive innovation, you can drive change, which again, you don't have to, you can kind of come in through a different door and say like, how are we going to be wildly different than all of our competitors in the marketplace in 10 years? Well, this is one way, right?
So on that, I think we'll,
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Kevin. Danny, appreciate it.